Well, may I say a huge thanks for this lovely invitation. And just while you were giving your brilliant introduction, I'm inspired by everything that Khaki is doing. And so it's wonderful to be your 126th online talk. And I was just scrolling through who the participants are on this session, and I recognized a few names. And so it's wonderful to be with friends old and new. And I've sort of pitched this not only at specialists in Mughal art. I really wanted it to be something that's accessible for everybody. And I was asked to speak on this theme of women in Mughal art. And it's such an enormous subject, really, and how do you take it? Is it how women are depicted in Mughal art, or what about women who are patrons of art? And so I hope that my talk will cover a few of these areas. And I just realized as I was sitting there, this lovely image that has been on our poster was an image that I supplied, and it comes from a beautiful album, an album associated with Lucknow that is in London in the Sir John Soane Museum. And I actually then haven't remember to put this particular image into the display to our talk. So let me just talk about it for a moment as we see this beautiful woman who's very confident in her own looks, and she's looking into the mirror that her maid holds up for her. And then there's a little vignette of the prince down in the lower right hand corner looking at her. So that's just to whet our appetite. But I want to go back right to a very, very early manuscript of Mughal ownership. We know that this Bayaz, that's an anthology of poetry, belonged to Hamida Banu Begum. Hamida Banu Begum is the wife of Humayun and the mother of Akbar. So she's the queen mother. She's the queen and then the sort of queen mother. And during Humayun's sort of tumultuous reign, when he lost control of India in the 1540s, Humayun and Hamida take refuge at the court of Shah Jahan. And we know that this manuscript also had belonged to that Safavid ruler. And so the likelihood is that it was a gift to Hamida during that time when the emperor and his wife are basically taking refuge at his court. And the manuscript has these two portraits in it. They seem to connect with this style of Tabriz painting around the 1540s. And we see on one side this royal woman, and she's holding flowers. She's wearing jewelry and a headdress and refined clothes. And then we see this Persian figure on the left kneeling, sort of offering gifts to her across the page. They don't seem to be portraits that were originally made to go together, but they have been placed together. And as such, it's in the way that they've been placed together, it places this woman in the kind of chief and important role. And this, we don't know whether this painting was actually made as a portrait of Hamida Banu Begum, or whether it was a portrait that was then inserted into the manuscript and placed there. But once we can be sure of her ownership of the manuscript, in a sense, there's an element in which the painting acts as a referent to her. And so really the point I'm trying to make is that this is a very, very early painting of Mughal patronage, certainly Mughal ownership belonging to Hamida Banu Begum. And in some ways we could see how this as a portrait ends up being a referent to her herself. But the earliest datable Mughal painting, according to Laura Parodi, is this wonderful painting by Dust Muhammad of Humayun in a landscape. And this is a painting that was preserved carefully by his grandson Jahangir when he made the Gulshan album. And this is a part, preserved in a part of that album that is in Berlin. And we see Humayun in this magnificent landscape. He's with his entourage in the lower section of the painting with the men of the court. His brother Hindal is offering a little image of Akbar to him. And this has been identified as the celebrations of the circumcision of Akbar. And we can see these three little children who are playing, and their two nursemaids that are up in the upper corner here. And then over to the left side here, you can see the women of the court. And I've put a little blow up here. You can see that we have these 5 women in the landscape and the 2 eunuchs who are there to protect them and look after them. And when you look carefully at the composition of this painting, and I'm really following Laura Parodi's brilliant work here, she identifies how this is a painting that really is about the relationship between Humayun and Hamida Banu Begum. We see how there's an unbroken sort of compositional line between Humayun and the woman seated at the far left here. And their clothes echo each other too, in the green and orange that they both wear. And so in all likelihood, this here is Hamida Banu Begum, the mother of Akbar, being represented. And I love how we have this little lady in yellow here, and she's offering flowers to Hamida Banu Begum. And it's kind of resonates with that double opening of that Bayaz manuscript that I have just shown you. The other women here are probably the sisters of Hamida, of Humayun, or else his other important wives. And they are dressed in fine Persian brocades and with elaborate gold jewelry. So this gives us a flavor of the Mughal court and the role of women within the court at this early Mughal period. Women played an incredibly important role within the life of the Mughal court through their marriages, but also many times as connectors really between the men of the court as well. So Hamida Banu Begum was a very educated woman. I'll just go back to the previous slide. She was came from a distinguished lineage of the Sufis of connected to the Sufi of Ahmed of Jami. And we see here in Laura Parodi's analysis that this is probably the father of Hamida Banu Begum, and he wears the same purple colors of clothes as the little image of Akbar that's being presented to Humayun here. And so we see how there's this great family connection that's being developed. But we know that Hamida was a significant collector of and owner of books, and we have the seals that she that show her ownership of various manuscripts. And the seal at the top here, this beautiful lobed seal here, is the seal that she used up to the period of 1560. And we have a number of her manuscripts. So I think in total there are 13 manuscripts that we know that were in Hamida Banu's library. And this Divan of Khwaja Hidri in the British Library, you can see her seal here, her seal of ownership. And then there are other later seals of ownership. Around 1560, she had a square seal made, and her later manuscripts that were in her ownership, not necessarily later in date, but later in her ownership, have this square seal here. I love how in the Akbarnama, the women are really present, but often they are sort of hidden, as it were, within an image. And this is a magnificent example. This shows Akbar and his mother, Mariam Makhani, traveling by boat to Agra in 1562. It's a painting by Tulsi, assisted by Durga on the left side and Narayan on the right side. And we see in the painting, I'm just going to reduce the people here so that here we go, so I can see my own screen properly. Yeah, we see here Akbar, and he's seated on his boat, he's open, he's got the members of his court. I love how we have, all the close members of his entourage and even his special horse that is in the boats as they travel down the Yamuna River. And then on the left-hand side of this page, we have the way in which the harem are traveling. So Mariam Makhani, and we have these beautiful canopied tents in which the members of the royal female household travel so that they're hidden from view. Only this lady here is a woman that we see within the image. And so the role of women within the dynastic presence of role within of women within the Akbarnama is very much present, seen in moments like this or in birth scenes. But these are not portraits of these women. They are images that reflect their presence and refer to them and refer to their role within the imperial family. A painting from the second Akbarnama is detached from that manuscript, which is mostly in the Chester Beatty Library. And this page is on loan to the Dallas Museum of Art, really captures the complex world of the imperial harem. So this is a page celebrating the circumcisions of Salim, Danyal, and Murad, the three sons of Akbar, who were all actually born within a very short period. Salim's born in 1569, and then Danyal and Murad are born in 1570s and 71. And so the celebrations for their circumcisions took place at the same time. And here we see Salim in the arms of a foster mother within the imperial court, and here Danyal and Murad, they sort of look like mini adults in the way that the children have been portrayed. It's only really much later in almost the Shah Jahan period where we begin to see children really looking like children in portraits. But I love how this image captures the kind of hierarchy and importance of women within the Mughal harem. So we have here these the kind of Rajmatas of the Mughal harem, probably Hamida Banu Begum. They're wearing this traditional, much more traditional Chagatai dress. But then other women here, attendants and so on, have much more Indian dress. And contemporary reports about Akbar's harem sort of place the numbers of women within it somewhere between 300 and 5,000. Now, within that, you have official wives of Akbar, but you also have concubines. And as we probably all know, Akbar really used marriage as a very important way of establishing his kind of the effective integration of his rule properly within India. He makes these very important marriage alliances with Rajput families, the first one with the Kachwaha Rajputs of Amber. And in a sense, as Akbar uses these marriage alliances, we see that he uses the harem as a way of kind of creating this multi-ethnic and in a way very women-centered world within the Mughal court as a way of establishing relationships and the strength of his rule within India. But this is a court where there isn't a direct portraiture of women. How do the Mughals really connect? How do they really express ideas of female rulership? And one of the areas in which we see this taking place is in the use of the Madonna as a motif. Now, within the Islamic tradition, Mary has an incredibly important place. There's a whole surah of the Quran devoted to her. And we see how the Mughals themselves create an association between the kind of idea of Mary as a perfect mother, as an ideal mother, and their own royal mothers, because Hamida Banu Begum is given the title Maryam Makani in the place of Mary, and Jahangir's wife is given the title Maryam Uzzamani, Mary of the age. And we see how the motif of the Virgin Mary is drawn into dynastic imagery, where Govind Bailey originally and Ebba Koch, many other scholars have really talked about the Virgin Mary as a kind of expression of female rulership and female dynastic identity in the Mughals. So in this magnificent darbar scene of Jahangir, dating from around 1620, you can see how just within that very special space of the throne charoka, we see this tiny motif of the Madonna looking down on this great darbar scene, so really closely associated with Jahangir. And it's also related to the way in which the Mughals articulated an idea of themselves, particularly Akbar and Jahangir, or as messianic kind of rulers, as renewers of this kind of millennial age. And so obviously that connection between sort of the Virgin and then the emperor as an almost kind of Jesus-like figure, or a messianic-like figure, is also part of what's going on here. On the right-hand side, you can see a famous image from the National Museum attributed to Abul Hassan, where we see Jahangir and he's holding a little portrait of the Madonna. And the kind of layers to this image are fascinating, I think, because in holding that image, he's closely associated with the idea of the Madonna through the power of touch. And the image itself is something that relates to, is a reference to the kind of iconic images of the Virgin Mary that were brought by Jesuits to the Mughal court in the 1580s. You can see there's a resonance, in fact, between the kind of pose of the Madonna here and the pose of the Madonna there. And there's a kind of mimesis between the iconic presence of the sacred figure in the image that is then mediated to Jahangir across the frame, but then also across the frame of the charoka. That iconic presence is mediated to us. So it's as if we are in the very sort of presence of the emperor here as he holds this image of the Virgin Mary. And again, you can see how the pose of the Virgin here, she sort of looks downwards. And so there's this kind of subtle idea that in fact, she's paying obeisance to Jahangir. She's deferential. She's showing her deference to the great emperor here. And of course, his nimbus, his halo is glowing much, much brighter than hers, really. Well, one of the most famous early images of the Madonna is this work attributed to Basawan in the San Diego Museum of Art. And it's a fascinating image where Basawan shows the kind of pictorial hybridity, aesthetic hybridity, as the Mughals are drawing on influences, different influences, and particularly responding to European works of art, but not embracing them in a kind of wholesale way. The engraving on the right-hand side of Pietas Regia is frequently cited in Mughal literature. It was the frontispiece, one of the frontispieces to a royal polyglot Bible that Jesuits had brought to the Emperor Akbar in 1580. And this engraving reverberates down through Mughal art over the next 2 or 3 generations, really. And I think you can see even in the relationship that I've put up between these 2 images, how Basawan is playing on the idea of this Pietas Regia, allegorical female figure, and eliding her identity with that of the Madonna. It's almost as if this image is a kind of has the idea of a stable here with this little straw covered canopy and the goat here. We have this very European motif of the architecture and the curtain here. But the child doesn't seem really connected to the Madonna. And so it's unlikely that actually a European Madonna is the chief source of influence here. I love the way in which Basawan really both borrows and responds rather than borrows to European art in the sense of volume in the figure of the Madonna. And yet behind it, he places this completely 2-dimensional carpet. And that gives the effect of making the Madonna almost float above the picture plane, float in space, because the carpet has this complete 2-dimensionality. So to place something 3-dimensional on top of it kind of thrusts her forward into the space of the viewer. So it's both an embracing of kind of European modes and also a total rejection of them at the same time. It's a real juxtaposition that he places together. Now, possibly the sources that Basawan might have used are something like this Cleopatra engraving by Marcantonio Raimondi, which we can see in Isfahan painting with Riza Abbasi, seems to be a European source that he is drawing on in his artworks. So already from this, we understand that the way in which Mughal artists articulate ideas of femininity in response to European art has a great deal of kind of slippage and displacement. And this painting by Sanbla, again, that dates in this kind of like first generation of artists who are dealing with the influx of European art that comes to the Mughal court, is, I think, a wonderful example of how we see the very unstable identity of the Madonna kind of intersecting with the idea of a kind of allegorical female saintly figure, this very strong women that come in response to European art. Because here we see the sort of, main, as it were, queen-like figure who's seated in this lovely pavilion. And then looking out in the context of the image, it's almost like she's her attendant. But if you just think of this as a motif, it's almost like a Madonna motif, like a painting of the Madonna almost just set into the wall looking outwards. And then we also see this other woman drawn from ideas of European art with that her hand up with a finger of 2 in a sort of blessing motif. And she's sitting on this Savonarola chair. And all the men within this image are kind of inquiring. It looks as if they're looking for insight. The women are the ones who are in control. So we see this kind of slipping of the identity of the Madonna or the consort or the courtesan, even within the image itself. And the men here all have, like, this guy has glasses, this guy is peering into his book. These 2 are kind of coming, seeking an audience, as it were, through this gatekeeper woman here. So I love the way in which a painting like this shows the very open-ended kind of interpretation of how these women are being portrayed, and as I say, the kind of very unstable identity. Here's a beautiful close-up, and in that headdress and so on as well, you can see, I think, the influence from the Pietas Regia engraving. Of course, breastfeeding was an incredibly important aspect of the life of the Mughal harem, because when a prince was born, they were deliberately given to various different wet nurses, and it was a way of forming very close, strong ties of kinship within the royal family and the nobility at the heart of the Mughal court. But obviously there was no, in a culture where you're not having any direct portraiture of women, let alone of them breastfeeding, how do you express their importance? And so in many ways, the image of the Madonna breastfeeding becomes a means of expressing this displaced means of expressing the importance of breastfeeding at the Mughal court. And so we see that both in the Basawan painting, but also we do begin to see within Mughal art other images of breastfeeding. This example from the Harvard Museum on the right is again quite a Madonna-ish example of a breastfeeding woman, but there are some images where you can see her much more as a kind of princess type of figure as well. So we've already been establishing then that the ways in which appropriations from European art of Mughal women are located in meanings within the Mughal court. So like the breastfeeding, having that kind of resonance with something very important within their own culture. And the borrowings from European art, or the ways in which female identities are created in borrowings from European art, are really rooted in ideas embedded within Mughal culture. But we see that there's this very open-ended idea of what these identities are. And in a sense, art provides the opportunity to be bold and creative in a way that is not always possible in words, where you can move beyond just the conventional rhetorics of words. And so in the painting on the left, we see how this woman, again, she's like this incredible fusion of a kind of like, you know, a Persian princess, but also this European style of kind of Madonna. And here we see her directly praying to the sun. And of course, during Akbar's reign, actually the importance of the sun and her worship of the sun became very prominent from the time of the 1580s, when he establishes the Din-i-Ilahi, and Akbar himself connects his own identity very much to solar worship, and he reorients the entire Mughal calendar to be a solar calendar rather than the lunar Islamic calendar. And so we see here this, you know, interesting identity that's created of this Madonna type of figure in relation to the sun. I think that one of the things that the Mughals begin to explore as they develop this idea of this superhuman allegorical kind of female figure who's not a Madonna, she's not we see the way in which in the central picture here, and my apologies for the typo that I can see here, it's the Gulshan album, not the Gukshan album, that we have this. So she is in this connection with Majnun, and the whole point about the story of Majnun, Layla and Majnun, is that Majnun falls in love with Layla, and at the beginning it's like a romance between them. But as he is denied her presence and goes into the wilderness, and he basically, the whole story is focused on the desire of the soul for God. And so in an image such as this, where we see this kind of like superhuman Layla, in fact, I think what is being explored here is the idea of finding the divine feminine, and that European works of art became a medium for, it gave a kind of visual vocabulary for exploring this kind of idea. That was really very much used by some of the most experimental artists. So this little detail in the center here is by Manohar, and Manohar actually plays around with this image of Majnun and the allegorical female figure from European art in many of his artworks. There are a number in the Gulshan album, and there's also one in the Chester Beatty Library, which I'm just coming up with. I just put in on this page as well this beautiful album page from the Pierpont Morgan Library, just showing how European engravings were sometimes actually cut out, stuck into albums. And I love the choices that have been made in this page. Even though it's all put together, you can see how there was originally a different image here, and then this engraving has been pasted in later on. But the way in which it's been cut out, the way in which it's framed, the way in which it's put into the page, again, really emphasizes the kind of presence of the woman here. So this is the page in the Chester Beatty Library, again, where we see Majnun kneeling before an allegorical woman here. And this page by Manohar shows how he gets hold of a motif and he plays with it. So again, it really establishes for us the way in which these appropriations are being given open-ended meanings within Mughal culture, within their sort of whole literary and intellectual world. There's a great deal of kind of, appropriation that that develops different sort of stereotypes within Mughal art. And on the left-hand side, we see a drawing that puts together two different motifs. In fact, both of these motifs are known from a small little album that's in the Louvre, where we have a drawing of this Jesuit priest that's attributed to Manohar, and then a female figure, and she's holding this kind of tanpura with a bow here. And again, you can see she's this sort of larger than life allegorical woman here. And then on the right hand side, we have a classic example of how a European couple is used to create a kind of stereotype. And I love the way in which the idea of the other is created in this image here, because you see how the man has this very kind of weak stance, if you like, and he's holding a sword. It's pointing downwards, and he's looking back, and it's really the woman again with the tanpura who has the kind of control within this image. So we see how there's a whole kind of development, both from kind of like direct appropriations from European engravings, but then playing around with the idea and the identities of these women, at times to locate meanings and express displaced meanings to do with real women at the Mughal court, but at other times to express ideas of other, or ideas of femininity through a kind of visual language at a safe distance. This little painting in the Parak Kala Bhavan, I think, is a wonderful exploration of the problem of female portraiture in the Mughal court. So we have this female artist, and she's in the zenana, and we can see other women of the court sort of sitting around looking on. And she's sitting here drawing, and this is the lady that she's drawing. Now, while we see the artist herself with her face totally uncovered, the woman who she's drawing is pulling this veil, or is totally wrapped up in her shawl, and it's as if she's being kind of hidden from our view as the viewer. And so it seems to allude to the idea that, you know, how do you portray women where they're meant to remain hidden and unseen within court life. One of the ways that I think royal women at the Mughal court begin to explore their own identities is through the European portraiture of women that come in. There's a very interesting little example of where Thomas Rowe has a miniature of a woman, and he says that she's a woman that he loves. And Jahangir, he's showing the portrait to Jahangir, and Jahangir basically asks for it. He says, you know, I'd like to have it. And Thomas Rowe really doesn't want to give it. And he basically says, you know, this woman, I really love her, but of course, Emperor, you can have it. And Jahangir picks up on the clue, and he says, no, it's okay. I don't need to have it, but can I take it and have copies made for my wives? And so it's taken, and the copies are made for its wives. And so we can imagine that as this kind of portraiture of women is received within the harem, it actually begins to impact how women think of themselves and portrayed within Mughal painting. So I'm just showing you here some examples of medallion portraits that are clearly directly copied or inspired by European artwork. So on the left-hand side is the earliest of the examples I'm showing here, almost certainly a medallion portrait of Elizabeth I that was brought to the Mughal court and was then copied by a Mughal artist. And then on the right-hand side, you can see these two images dating from the 18th century. And particularly this image on the left shows the very close relationship between medallion portraits and the whole motif of the charoka. The charoka window as a kind of codified form that Jahangir develops of portraiture that functions as a way, the frame functioning as a way of activating the kind of presence of the figure within the frame. And in the 17th century, as charoka portraits, they're very closely associated with the identity of the emperor. But by the 18th century, when the practice of charoka darshan has actually ceased at the court, it's a space that becomes liberated from just being an imperial space and becomes something associated much more closely with the idea of gaze, and often with a voyeuristic gaze as well. So coming to some lovely examples of portraits of women or of couples that seem to actually present real female identities at the Mughal court. We have on the left one of the earliest examples, which is Prince Murad and a consort by Manohar. We know that Manohar had a very close relationship to Prince Murad. They probably were born around the same time. They probably had known each other through their childhood. And in 1584, Murad was put in charge of all the Karkhanas. Abd as-Samad was his sort of right-hand man in doing that. And it's likely that around that time, Murad and Manohar came to know each other well. And in the kind of 1590s, roughly, there's a very extraordinary group, really, of 7 portraits that Manohar makes of Prince Murad. And this is one of the finest on the left that shows him with a consort. Whether this is meant to be his wife, who was the daughter of Mirza Aziz Kokar, I'm not sure, or whether it's meant to be just a concubine or some courtesan that he has a relationship. He was certainly very attached to the daughter of Mirza Aziz Kokar. And so for me, I think of it in that way. It's a very sensual portrait. See how his leg comes just underneath her body here. And again, there's this kind of intertwining of the figures through color, because the green of his trouser here is exactly the same green of her beautiful blouse. And they look at each other, and there's all these refined, drinks and food for them. And again, you see this lovely 2-dimensional carpet set against the kind of almost like 3-dimensional space of their bed. And then on the right hand side, we have Govardhan's painting of a dalliance on a terrace, which very clearly shows the portrait of Jahangir, I think, here. And to me, the female figure there seems to be a representation of his favorite queen, his 20th wife, Nur Jahan. She has a very distinctive look, this woman. She doesn't seem like many generic portraits of Mughal women, with a low hairline, with strong eyebrows, a large nose, strong lips. In this painting of Jahangir with Nur Jahan on a terrace, she has a much more generic look about her. But it's a fascinating painting that draws and shows the kind of hybridity and hybrid ways in which artists were drawing on different ideas. Jahangir here very unusually is presented like bare-chested and sitting in the lotus position. He has his halo. And Nur Jahan is offering wine cup to him. We have this European sort of symbol of the 2 angels bringing a canopy down over the figures. But it seems to articulate this idea very much of Jahangir as a Hindu king, a king who is truly Indian. And of course, his own mother was a Rajput princess. And placing the 2 figures together in this way draws on those ideas of king and consort, of god and consort together. These are 2 portraits also closely associated with Nur Jahan. And the Jaroka portrait on the right is attributed to Abul Hassan. Again, I think we have an idea of a distinct physiognomy here, with her eyebrows, this very strong nose, the lips. To me, this is actually a figure who looks like the painting we previously saw with the dalliance on a terrace. And then a portrait on the left that's usually thought of as perhaps a posthumous portrait of Jahangir just after he's died, that shows Nur Jahan, and she's holding the portrait of Jahangir as a little Jaroka image. Again, the idea that the image itself is capturing his presence, a way of his enduring presence even beyond his death. One of the most beautiful Mughal albums to survive is an album that Dara Shikar made for his wife, Nadira Banu Begum. And Jeremiah Losty's brilliant work on this album, especially for the 2012 exhibition on Mughal art at the British Library, I think really added to our sort of understanding, rather than just seeing all the portraits as kind of like generic different princesses or women of the royal court. Actually, he was arguing that within the context of the album, we can make specific identifications of the different women. And here on this double opening, we see Dara Shikar, and so the natural reading of the identity of the woman opposite him is that of Nadira Banu Begum. And the portraits have this incredible attention to the detail of textiles that are being worn there. Somebody recently was asking me why so many Mughal paintings have this kind of like darkened upper part to the body. So if anyone has any insights in the questions on that, then please do let me know. From the same album, here is a beautiful portrait of Jahanara. And Jahanara was such a key figure in the patronage of architecture, and she was a great author herself, writing a biography of Muinuddin Chishti and other religious texts as well. And I love her beautiful gold brocade trousers, these long sashes, and a sort of reference to her identity as an author is there in the notebook that she holds open. I think there is some kind of like limited observed portraiture of women at the Mughal court that develops through the 17th century. And the author Ellison Banks Findlay really attributes that more open attitude to the portrayal of women to the influence of Nur Jahan in the early 17th century. But I'm showing you here two portraits that come from the second half of the 17th century. I love this jewel portrait of a girl in a Chagatai cap. It's a tiny image, in fact. I mean, on our screens it looks large, but it's a little oval medallion portrait that might well have been set into a piece of jewelry. And to me, you know, it both has the sweetness of kind of European art and a feel of that kind of appropriation. Obviously, the Chagatai cap and her jewelry, I identify her as a kind of Mughal princess, and probably she might be an imaginary princess. I don't know. This is a classic example of something that to me sits on the cusp between a kind of ideal portraiture and observed portraiture. The portrait on the right has such a distinctive physiognomy with her beautiful high cheekbones that to me it feels like somebody is really drawing a specific person in that portrait. And I want to close with a very unusual portrait. It's a half-length portrait of Mumtaz Mahal, and it's set into a lacquered mirror case. The portrait was placed into that lacquered mirror case. And here we see her, a beautifully sensuous picture. She's her bare chest is visible, adorned by this beautiful jewelry, and there's an inscription that is the signature of the Shah Jahani artist Abid. And so it shows how portraiture of women at times could be very sensuous and erotic and preserved, you know, used in a very private and intimate way, presumably a portrait belonging to the Emperor Shah Jahan. So I've given you a bit of an overview, and I hope you've enjoyed that. I'd love to take your questions. So thank you for listening.
The question was, of all the women that you've researched, who is your favorite and why?
I think I love Hamida Banu Begum. She's such an amazing, resilient woman. Basically, when Humayun turns up in her area of town, she doesn't want to marry him. He's already it's already obvious that Humayun is struggling to deal with all the political goings on in North India, and she marries him, but she's actually this incredibly resilient woman. Mm-hmm. She gives birth to Akbar in difficult circumstances. She actually, when you read the preface to the Akbarnama, you see she had a very difficult labor. And then, she's dealing with the whole period when they're in the court of Shah Jahan, and then reestablishing the presence of the court of Humayun in Kabul. She's separated from Akbar for a very key time when he's a young child. But then she becomes this incredibly important figure who she lives till 1605. So she has this very, very long period of influence within the Mughal court. She is a great bibliophile. I didn't show you here, but she has a beautiful Ramayana manuscript that she commissions, and she has her own artists working for her making that. And just a few days before her death, we know that she ordered that manuscript to have a look at it.
Oh. So there was another question. Do we get any insights into the life of the common woman through Mughal paintings, besides people of the royal courts?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There's a lovely painting by Govardhan of I can't remember exactly. Maybe it's Darashika or it's somewhere in the mid 17th century, with a consort, and they're on a terrace. And there are these other women of the Mughal court, they're like, the attendants within the harem. And there's a brilliant dynamic between them, and they're all looking so bored. And I just love that painting because it kind of captures, I think, how much waiting around there must have been in the Mughal harem, And so there are, if within Mughal art, how much do we capture the life of real women at the court? I think not that much, but there are also, lovely textual sources. One of the examples that I find fascinating is how, there's an Armenian at Akbar's court who has quite a high position, and Akbar actually finds, another, Armenian woman, and they get married, and so there are textual sources that I think give us an insight into women who were not in the highest ranks of the court. So yeah.
Okay. A question from Maha was, could you tell us if the examples that you were shown were in response to commissioned art, whether they were done at the bidding of a patron or they were the artist's own doing?
So almost all Mughal art is the former, really, because you've got, the emperor who is, commissioning different works of art, whether in manuscripts. So like the Akbarnama painting, that's part of a commission to make the manuscript. Akbar himself has a hand in deciding what pages were going to be illustrated. And then, so that's definitely the case with the manuscripts, but also with the sort of one-off paintings, the individual paintings. I think there's this kind of combination. Yes, artists have a real agency within the imperial atelier, and they're seeing different works of art, and they are creating works of art, you know, from their own vision, but it comes within a kind of wider context of needing constantly to be, you know, presenting works to their patron. They are retained artists within the imperial atelier. So everything I've shown you today is by an artist whose salary is being paid, and they belong to the imperial workshop.
Okay. You did show an image of a woman artist at work. The question was, they never really made it to the top, right? Like the more well-known male artists of that period.
Yeah. There's that's right. We just know the names of a few female artists. One is Sahifa Banu, and she works in quite a kind of very traditional, more Persianate style. And then we also, more famously, there's an artist called Nadira Banu, not to be confused with Dara Shikoh's wife, Nadira Banu Begum, but Nadira Banu, we know, was a pupil of Akbar. Akbar is the head of Jahangir's workshop before he becomes Jahangir, when he's Prince Salim. And we know that she was the daughter of somebody called Mir Taqi. And Mir Taqi is an artist who plays a minor role in Akbar's atelier. In some, there are, for example, in the second Akbarnama, Mir Taqi paints a painting. He also paints a painting for Akbar's Ramayan. So she's basically the daughter of an artist. So to me, she's the closest to a professionally trained artist. But as you say, yeah, none of them become prominent.
A question from Mahadat. What is the difference between ideal and observed portraiture? And are these set terms used by historians?
Yes, I would say they are set terms in a way used by art historians. And an ideal portrait is the idea of something that comes from your imagination, that you are taking, in a general sense, your observations of, you know, human beings, of in this case, you know, what women look like, but you're putting it together in a way that is imagined. An observed portrait is the idea that you look at an individual person's actual features and you try to portray an optical likeness of that person. You try to recreate the visual experience of seeing that person in the flesh. And that's what's so sort of, you know, unusual in a way about Mughal art, is for an Islamic culture, they are one of the first to place a major emphasis on the idea of observed portraiture. But where we can see that very clearly in the case of men, it's more complex in the situation of portraying women.
And we come to the last question. Shenaz wanted to know, which is the best museum in London to view Mughal art?
Well, I would say the V&A, because the Indian galleries there always have a good selection of paintings. There are also lovely objects there. So I would say the V&A Indian galleries are the best place in London.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ursula. It was really great to have had you speak to us about this lesser known aspect of our heritage. Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for coming in on Saturday. And please do attend as many talks as you can. Thank you.
Thank you.